This week, I've got a guest joining me on Strip Pal Naked, and I'm delighted to have Aditya Bidikar, Letter of Black Cloud, Motor Crush, as well as a whole bunch of other books. People like Image, Black Crown, Vault, Black Mask, Only Press, basically everyone you could think of. And has taught me basically everything I know about the craft, so I'm really delighted to have him on the show. I'll be referring to him as Biddy, just because it's easier for me to pronounce for the rest of the episodes. So if you hear that, that's why. And he asked actually to not talk about his own work for this episode, but a book he loves, which is Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean's Violent Cases. He's got a lot to talk about lettering and how it influences him, and why it's a masterclass of interesting work. You're watching Strip Pal Naked, I'm Hass, this week with Biddy, and we're going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics with violent cases. Okay, so Biddy, the first thing you mentioned to me, that idea of lettering not being invisible, but here we've got like a book where there is a bunch of different lettering styles. It seems like everyone's got their own style.
Every character does have its own distinct style.
Yeah, as soon as we get to the main character's father, the dialogue style changes. Why do you think that isn't distracting, or why do you think that is an example of good lettering to make itself sort of visible?
I think this book what you would describe as meta almost, because nothing in the book is as it seems, and it is constantly drawing your attention to the fact that this is a narrated story and there is a very subjective narration that is happening there. I don't think at any point you're expected to forget that you're reading a comic in this, which is why it's fine for you not to be immersed into the story by the lettering either. So just like the writing and the artwork, I think it's McKean at some point of time decided that he wants you to notice the lettering as well, and he wants it to basically play a part in the personality of each character being portrayed.
If we look at an example, like we've got the first page where his father comes into it, and it sort of starts with this tier of panels along the top with the narrator who very, very closely resembles Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
You've got this handwritten style that represents the narrator, but then you've also got this kind of more, what would you call it, like more sort of traditional comic booky lettering maybe for the father?
Firstly, it's all caps, so it's a lot more authoritative. It's in very high contrast to the very fluid style that is used for the narrator's captions. So basically, it's a lot more solid. It's not swishy at all. And if you notice, it's got a lot more air between the lines than the narrator's lettering. So I think it's sort of meant to portray the way the narrator sees his father, which is a lot more confident, a lot solid. Like, in the beginning pages, you kind of get the feeling that, he loves his father, but he's also afraid of him.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of what is partly being portrayed by this.
Well, because that raises a cool point, because your font style is so much more than just clarity. For your process, when you're kind of looking for a new font for a new book that you're working on, it's not just a case of finding something that looks nice, right? But it's a case of finding something that actually works with the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about, it needs to basically fluidly work with the art style and the tone of the book itself. So I'm not going to use a very jaunty font for something that is very grim and gritty or something like that. The personality of the font needs to fit in with the personality of the book. And here, everything is done by hand, as in the lettering. I think it by default meshes together because he is literally using the same pen to do all of these things. So the identity kind of runs together because of that. So he kind of has the permission to do a lot more in terms of style.
Like, so in this example, you've got different fonts, or well, not fonts really, that's probably the wrong term because he's hand lettering it, but different styles for each character.
Yeah, letter forms, you can say.
Okay, yeah. But why would you not necessarily go that route in your own work? What's the difference?
His hand will have, like, if you look at the narrator's lettering, the S's there, even though they're italicized and they're lowercase, are very similar to the S's in the father's lettering style.
Yeah.
Because there is a little hook at the left, and the curve kind of comes like towards the right then.
Well, even the tails, if you look at on that same page, you've got the narrator's tail is very, very, very similar.
So this is something he's doing that's fun here, because he's not actually changing the balloon styles at all for any of them, like including between the captions and the balloons. These things are helping the reader already read the lettering as something that belongs with the book.
In traditional superhero comics, you've got a different caption box style than, say, like the dialogue style. So, a caption box will be an oblong, whereas a dialogue will typically be like a balloon or whatever.
Yeah.
But here, we're also not getting that. So, like, when you talk about it all being kind of matching and organic in a certain style, like, it almost works to sort of keep the sense that, like, no matter where we are in the story, every time we see one of these captions, it's the voice of Neil Gaiman, almost like saying stuff to us.
Exactly, because it's almost like the narrator is making all these voices to communicate these things to you, but it's always him talking. And I think the boxes basically tell you that it is always the narrator talking. Like whatever you're looking at, it is always the narrator remembering these things and narrating them to you. And I think the lettering here reflects that while indicating that it's all basically the narrator talking.
Well, one thing that I want to dive into, definitely, talked a little bit about it in terms of how you saw the father's font style and what that meant about him.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of other font styles in here that we haven't talked about yet.
Sure.
So we've got the grandma's font style, and we've also got the osteopaths.
Yeah.
And I'd be very, very curious what you think the reasoning is behind the choice of style.
Yeah, I think here we need to kind of start with the narrator style itself. I think the narrator style is like this because you are partly supposed to read this as written. It is Neil Gaiman who put it down in text. And I think that the sort of italicized right lowercase style is sort of supposed to indicate that this is being written by somebody. The grandma style, I think, is sort of a counterpoint to that, where she looks like she's a little fussy because she has that little bun and like, you know, the artwork as well. And also, I almost think that this is a reference to the difference in education in the narrator and his grandmother, because the narrator was probably, he grew up in a school where you didn't really have to do cursive writing that much, but grandmother was probably taught cursive in school and just, you know, carried that forward in her life. So I think that this lettering style sort of reflects that, while the osteopath's lettering style is literally an accent. Like you literally read this and you kind of get an accent, because it's sort of inspired by art deco fonts, because you have the sort of circular O's and the circular G's and the wide R's, and you know, you kind of hear that jovial Middle European accent that I think is implied by this.
And that's like, this is the stuff that, like, this is one of the things that got me really excited about when I was reading the book. And it really is like the style shift so much, and it obviously does it a lot in the art as well. But like the style shift in the lettering is so interesting, because beyond the idea of, you know, if it's distracting or whatever.
Yeah.
The pure fact that you, as a reader, can learn something about the characters just through the lettering alone, like through a picture of their face, and the lettering will tell you something about them.
Yeah.
And then it starts to work on another level of contrast stuff. Then you're able to look at like the son and the father, or the son and the grandmother, or the father and the grandmother, and you start to notice how these different styles are changed, because you've also got in the osteopath and the dad two styles that are sort of similar, right?
Yeah.
They're both uppercase. They're both kind of got like a formal stoicism to them.
Yeah.
Whereas the grandma and the son, theirs is different, and theirs is lowercase. And so you could imply then there's some kind of strong masculineness to that uppercase thing that the son hasn't necessarily taken on. And there's more of a link to the feminist side.
No, absolutely, because I think this book is about masculinity as well, because like, you know, there's the gangsters and the osteopath, and the narrator's relationship with his father is entirely to do with how the two of them parse their masculinity. So I definitely think that is intentional, that he sort of sees this uppercase lettering almost in the terms of these are the authoritative people, while the grandmother is somebody you sort of relate to on a much more informal level, you know?
Well, I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaways from reading this from like a letterer perspective. I think it gives you the opportunity to think that there are ways to do things differently, as long as you can keep them sort of organic in a way. Even though it's actually working against most of like what we expect kind of comics to look like, you can do all this stuff. You can be a little bit maybe more playful with things, but if you can keep it in an organic way, there is almost like no end to what you can achieve.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons that I keep saying that this is a first principles kind of comic is that McKean is not being bound by these rules that are given to a letterer or an artist. He's essentially basically starting from scratch and saying that this is what I'm trying to convey, and how can I convey that the most effectively, considering that when I first read this book, I did not notice at all how it was flouting conventions, because I was not reading it as somebody who was literate in the specific American style of comics. I hadn't read a single comic in around 4 years before this, and I started again with, I believe, Sin City, Violent Cases, and Sandman, I think. Sin City is much more traditionally lettered, but you look at Sandman and Violent Cases, both of those things are flouting conventions. I never thought that, because I thought, well, okay, the Sandman has this sort of thing that he is, like you're supposed to sort of hear his voice in your head, which is why his voice is, you know, depicted like that. So I kind of did not realize that there are these certain conventions that are there. So basically, it kind of enabled me to come to these rules with much more skepticism.
Yeah.
This is a rule, but why is it a rule? And as long as it's something I can do something different that helps me convey the story or the motive of the storyteller in a different way, or like effectively. So that's I think all that matters really. It's like whether it works or not.
And that seems about as good a place as any to leave this single episode. Biddy and I talked a lot about violent cases, and some of that will be in future episodes as well, but if you want to get access to the full talk between the two of us, it'll be uploaded soon to my Patreon page at patreon.com/strippanelnaked, and there's also a ton more content there if you're interested in anything else that I talk about on this show. It's updated every single week, and there's a year and a half's worth of material in there already. Until next time, thanks for watching. For more comic talk and analysis, you can also find me on Twitter at HassanOE. Of course, there's the Patreon at patreon.com/strippanelnaked. I'd appreciate your support via that. And if you want to keep up to date with all the latest videos, you can hit subscribe and that little notification bell, and you'll get them dinged straight to you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.